Hello and welcome to our guide to Minnesota. Tucked away in the upper Midwest and Great Lakes region of the United States, this is a state that often flies under the radar. But, for those who take the time to explore it, Minnesota reveals a world of stunning natural beauty, vibrant cities, and a rich tapestry of history. Its nickname is the Land of 10,000 Lakes, but that's actually an understatement. The true number is closer to 12,000. These shimmering bodies of water define the landscape and the lifestyle here, offering endless opportunities for adventure recreation and quiet contemplation. From the bustling streets of Minneapolis to the serene wilderness of the Boundary Waters, Minnesota is a place of wonderful contrasts. The state motto, L'Étoile du Nord, or the Star of the North, perfectly captures its spirit. It's a guiding light, a northern beacon in the heart of the continent. This is a place where strong communities are built on a foundation of hard work, a deep appreciation for the outdoors, and a welcoming spirit shaped by waves of immigration. People here are known for being Minnesota nice, a friendly and polite demeanor that you'll encounter everywhere you go. But don't let that fool you. Minnesotans are also a hardy and resilient bunch, shaped by the dramatic swing of the seasons, from warm, sunny summers to cold, snowy winters that they embrace with gusto. Throughout this journey, we'll uncover what makes Minnesota so special. We will travel from the headwaters of the mighty Mississippi River to the dramatic cliffs overlooking Lake Superior. We will explore the history of its indigenous peoples, the Dakota and Ojibwe, whose presence is deeply woven into the land and its stories. We'll trace the footsteps of the French voyageurs, the lumberjacks, and the Scandinavian farmers who all played a part in shaping the state's identity. This is a land of innovators and artists, home to iconic musicians, world-class museums, and a thriving cultural scene that might just surprise you. So get ready to plan your trip. We'll provide you with a map to the must-see sights and experiences that Minnesota has to offer. We will give you the tools and inspiration you need to craft your own perfect adventure in the North Star State. Whether you're an outdoor enthusiast eager to paddle through pristine waters, a history buff curious about the past, or a city explorer looking for great food and culture, Minnesota has something waiting for you. Let's begin our exploration of this incredible and often overlooked corner of America. In this guide, we've structured our tour to give you a complete picture of Minnesota from its ancient roots to its modern-day attractions. We'll start by diving into the state's early history, learning about the Dakota, the Ojibwe. They were the first to call this land home. Understanding their culture and deep connection to the lakes, rivers, forests, we'll see how their legacy lives on in place names, traditions, and the ongoing story of the state. This historical foundation gives you richer context for everything you see and do. Next, we'll journey through European settlement and the birth of the state. Fur traders paddling the waterways, loggers harvesting white pine forests, pioneers building farms on fertile prairies, the rise of industries, immigrants from Germany, Ireland, Scandinavia. Their customs and traditions shaped Minnesota, architecture, food, festivals. After the past, we turn to the great outdoors. Minnesota's natural wonders are its crown jewels: the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, pristine lakes, old-growth forests, the north shore of Lake Superior, dramatic cliffs, cascading waterfalls, charming small towns, Itasca State Park. Walk the headwaters of the Mississippi River. Finally, a practical guide to top attractions and trip planning tips. Mall of America, Split Rock Lighthouse, Minneapolis, St. Paul. Best times of year to visit. How to get around. Unique local experiences you shouldn't miss. Ready for your Minnesota adventure? Let's get started. Long before European explorers set foot in this region, the land we now call Minnesota was the cherished homeland of the Dakota people. Forests, prairies, countless lakes. The Dakota are part of a larger group of Siouan-speaking peoples, often referred to as the Sioux Nation. Their name, Dakota, translates to friend or ally. Southern Minnesota, central Minnesota, the confluence of the Minnesota and Mississippi rivers. Their society was organized into bands, each with its own leaders and traditions, all sharing a common language and worldview. Corn, beans, squash. Women were primary farmers, gathering wild rice, berries, medicinal plants. Men were skilled hunters, bison on the western prairies, deer, other game in the eastern woodlands. Bark lodges in summer, warm, transportable teepees during seasonal hunts. This mobile lifestyle allowed them to follow the resources that nature provided, ensuring their survival and prosperity through the changing seasons. Spirituality was the bedrock of Dakota society, woven into every aspect of their daily existence. They believed in a powerful, all-encompassing spirit known as Wakantanka, or the Great Mystery. The sun, the moon, the earth, and every living creature. This belief fostered a profound respect for the natural world, viewing themselves not as masters of the land, but as relatives to it. Rituals and ceremonies, such as the sun dance, were vital for maintaining balance, giving thanks, and seeking guidance from the spirit world. Storytelling was also a crucial tradition. Elders passing down creation stories, historical accounts, and moral lessons that preserved their culture and identity for future generations. The social structure of the Dakota was based on extended family networks and a strong sense of collective responsibility. Generosity, courage, wisdom. Leaders were chosen based on their ability to embody these virtues and provide for their people. Decisions were often made through councils, where elders and other respected members of the community would discuss matters until a consensus was reached. This collaborative approach ensured that everyone had a voice and that the well-being of the entire community was prioritized. This deeply rooted culture, established over countless generations, would soon face monumental changes with the arrival of new people from the East. Beginning in the 17th century, the landscape of Minnesota began to change with the westward migration of the Ojibwe people. Also known as the Anishinaabe, part of the Algonquian language family, originally lived further east, around the Great Lakes region, Michigan, Ontario. According to their oral traditions, a prophecy urged them to move west to a place where food grows on water. This sacred food was wild rice, or manuman in their language, which grew in abundance in the shallow lakes and rivers of northern Minnesota. This migration was not a single event, but a gradual movement of families and bands over several decades. The Ojibwe brought with them a distinct culture adapted to the northern woodlands and waterways. They were expert canoe builders, crafting swift and lightweight birch bark canoes perfect for navigating the region's intricate network of lakes and rivers. This mobility was key to their success, allowing them to travel great distances for hunting, fishing, trapping, and trade. Their society was organized into clans, each represented by an animal totem like the bear, loon, marten, which defined a person's social identity and responsibilities. Like the Dakota, they lived a seasonal lifestyle, gathering at large villages in the summer and dispersing into smaller family groups for the winter trapping season. As the Ojibwe moved further into Minnesota, their expansion inevitably led them into territories that had long been used by the Dakota. This created a period of conflict and competition over resources, particularly hunting grounds and access to the burgeoning fur trade with Europeans. The Ojibwe, who had earlier contact with French traders, were often better equipped with firearms, which gave them a significant advantage in these disputes. A series of battles and skirmishes occurred over many years, gradually pushing the Dakota further south and west. By the mid-18th century, the Ojibwe had established a firm presence in the northern half of Minnesota, while the Dakota remained dominant in the south. Despite these conflicts, the relationship between the Dakota and Ojibwe was not always one of hostility. There were also periods of peace, trade, and even intermarriage between the two nations. They shared a deep spiritual connection to the land and a reverence for the natural world. Both peoples developed a profound understanding of Minnesota's ecosystems, and their knowledge of the land was unparalleled. The arrival of the Ojibwe created a new and complex human dynamic, adding another important layer to the story of Minnesota's indigenous history, just as the first waves of European influence began to reach the region. The names on a map of Minnesota today are a living testament to its indigenous heritage. Many of the state's most prominent features, its rivers, its lakes, and its cities, carry names derived from the Dakota and Ojibwe languages. This linguistic landscape serves as a constant reminder of the people who first knew and named this land. The name of the state itself, Minnesota, comes from the Dakota phrase Emni Sota Makochi, which can be translated as land where the waters reflect the clouds, a poetic line that captures the sky-tinted surfaces of its thousands of lakes. This name was chosen for the territory, forever linking the state's identity to its Dakota roots. The mighty Mississippi River, the backbone of the continent, also gets its name from an indigenous language. The Ojibwe called it Mississippi, meaning Great River. French explorers adopted this name, which became Mississippi. Its source, Lake Itasca, is an example of blended naming traditions. The name was created by explorer Henry Schoolcraft by combining parts of two Latin words, veritas, truth, and caput, head, to mean true head. However, the Ojibwe had their own name for the lake, Omashkuzo Zagaigan, or Elk Lake, connecting it to the natural world around it. Many other places carry names that tell a story. The city of Minneapolis combines the Dakota word for water, MNI, with the Greek word for city, polis, creating the city of water. The Minnesota River, which flows into the Mississippi near St. Paul, was known to the Dakota as Wattapan, a name reflecting its role as a major transportation route. Even smaller towns and natural features echo this history. The town of Wabasha is named after a line of influential Dakota chiefs. Anoka comes from a Dakota word meaning on both sides, referring to its location on the Rum River. These names are more than just labels. They are threads connecting the present to a deep and meaningful past. Understanding these place names adds a rich layer of context to any journey through Minnesota. When you paddle on Lake Minnetonka, you are on the big water in the Dakota language. When you visit the city of Bemidji, you are in a place named after the Ojibwe chief Shainawishkung, whose name meant the Traverser, because his people's path crossed the Mississippi River at that point. These names ground you in the history of the land, encouraging you to see it not just as scenery, but as a cultural landscape shaped by centuries of human experience. They are echoes of the first voices that described these places, a history written on the water, forests, and prairies of the North Star State. The first significant contact between indigenous peoples and Europeans in Minnesota, mid-17th century, driven by European demand for beaver pelts, French explorers, missionaries, traders, voyageurs. Pierre Esprit Radisson, Médard Chouard, Sieur de Groseilliers, traveling deep into the interior building relationships with Dakota and Ojibwe. They were not conquerors seeking settlement, instead, partners in a commercial enterprise, beginning of a profound economic and cultural transformation. The fur trade created a new economic reality. Metal pots, knives, wool blankets, firearms integrated into daily life. In exchange, Dakota and Ojibwe supplied a steady flow of furs, especially beaver, used for fashionable hats in Europe. This trade shifted traditional subsistence patterns. Hunting and trapping became more commercially focused. Men spent more time away from their villages, altering social roles, creating a dependence on European trade goods for survival and status. This new economic relationship was complex. On one hand, it brought new technologies that eased life. A metal kettle was more durable than a clay pot. A firearm was more effective than a bow and arrow. But it also introduced intense resource competition between indigenous groups and made them vulnerable to a global market beyond their control. Traders brought alcohol, diseases like smallpox and measles, leading to catastrophic population losses. Trading posts became hubs of economic and cultural exchange. Forts established by the French, later by the British, at places like Grand Portage on Lake Superior, the Minnesota River, and the Mississippi River. Bustling, multicultural posts, voyageurs, indigenous trappers, Métis families. The fur trade era lasted nearly 2 centuries. It laid the groundwork for European expansion and the treaties and land cessions to come. The end of the fur trade era in the early 19th century marked a significant shift in the relationship between the United States government and the indigenous peoples of Minnesota. The focus moved from a partnership based on trade to a policy driven by land acquisition. As American settlers began pushing westward, the government saw Minnesota's vast forests and fertile prairies as prime territory for expansion. To legally facilitate this, a series of treaties were negotiated with the Dakota and Ojibwe. These agreements, often conducted under immense pressure and with questionable translation, would systematically transfer millions of acres of tribal land into the hands of the United States. One of the earliest significant agreements was the Treaty of 1837, in which the Ojibwe and Dakota were persuaded to cede a vast triangle of land between the St. Croix and Mississippi rivers. This opened up the region to lumber operations, as the white pine forests were suddenly available for harvest. However, the most transformative treaties were the Treaty of Traverse des Sioux and the Treaty of Mendota in 1851. In these 2 monumental agreements, the Dakota were compelled to sell most of their remaining lands in southern and western Minnesota, over 24 million acres, for a fraction of their value, confining them to a narrow reservation along the Minnesota River. The promises made in these treaties were often broken or delayed. Payments for the land were frequently diverted to traders to settle supposed debts, leaving the Dakota with little to show for the immense territory they had surrendered. The transition from a traditional nomadic lifestyle to a sedentary life on the reservation was fraught with hardship. The Dakota faced starvation as government-supplied food rations failed to arrive on time, and their new farming efforts were hampered by poor land and inexperience with the required techniques. This growing frustration and desperation created a powder keg of resentment that would have devastating consequences for everyone in the region. The treaty process fundamentally altered the map of Minnesota and the lives of its first inhabitants. It was a period defined by profound loss and cultural disruption for the Dakota and Ojibwe, who saw their ancestral homelands shrink dramatically. For the United States, it was a period of aggressive expansion, clearing the way for an unprecedented wave of European settlement. The land, once a shared resource managed through generations of tradition, was now surveyed, divided, and sold as private property. This systematic transfer of land set the stage for the founding of the state and the rapid growth that would follow. With vast tracts of land opened up by the treaties, Minnesota's immense natural resources were ripe for exploitation. The first major industry to take hold was logging, fueled by the seemingly endless forests of towering white pine and red pine in the northern and central parts of the state. Rivers like the St. Croix, Rum, and Mississippi became the highways of this new economy. Hardy lumberjacks, many of them Scandinavian immigrants and French-Canadian immigrants, spent their winters in remote logging camps, felling giant trees with axes and crosscut saws. It was grueling, dangerous work, requiring incredible strength and endurance to survive the harsh Minnesota winters in the wilderness. In the spring, the river pigs, as the log drivers were called, took over. Their job was to guide the millions of logs downstream to the sawmills. This was perhaps the most perilous job of all, as they balanced on floating logs, using long poles called peaveys to break up massive log jams that could form at any moment. Cities like Stillwater and Minneapolis grew into bustling sawmill centers. The sound of buzzing saws filled the air as the logs were transformed into lumber, which was then used to build the rapidly growing towns and cities across the American prairie. a region almost entirely devoid of trees. While rivers were the initial arteries of the lumber trade, the arrival of railroads in the 1860s and the 1870s revolutionized the industry and the state's entire economy. Railroads could reach areas far from major rivers, opening up even more of the state's forests to logging. They also allowed for year-round transportation of lumber, freeing the industry from its seasonal dependence on the spring thaw. More importantly, the railroads connected Minnesota to the rest of the country, enabling its timber, agricultural products, and later, its iron ore, to be shipped to markets across the nation and beyond, fueling America's Industrial Revolution. The expansion of the railroads was driven by ambitious and sometimes ruthless entrepreneurs like James J. Hill, whose Great Northern Railway became a transcontinental powerhouse. His railroad not only transported goods, but also actively promoted settlement. The railway companies were among the largest landowners, having received massive land grants from the government as an incentive to build. They launched extensive advertising campaigns in Europe and the eastern United States, marketing Minnesota as a land of opportunity. The railroads brought in the settlers, and in turn, the settlers produced the goods that kept the trains running, creating a powerful cycle of growth and development that transformed Minnesota in just a few decades, The second half of the 19th century saw a massive influx of immigrants who came to Minnesota seeking land, opportunity, and freedom. Lured by glowing reports from railroad companies, the state government, and letters from friends and family, hundreds of thousands of Europeans set their sights on the North Star State. The earliest waves were dominated by Germans and Irish, who settled in urban areas and rural areas. They established farms in the fertile Minnesota River Valley and built vibrant ethnic communities in cities like St. Paul, where they founded churches, breweries, and social clubs. The group most famously associated with Minnesota's settlement story is the Scandinavians. Immigrants from Norway, Sweden, and Denmark arrived in staggering numbers, drawn by a landscape that reminded them of their homelands and by the promise of owning their own farms under the Homestead Act of 1862. Norwegians tended to settle in the rolling hills and valleys of the southeast. Swedes were drawn to the areas around the Chisago Lakes and the St. Croix Valley. Their influence is still deeply felt today. Lutheran churches, Lutefisk and Lefse, especially during holiday celebrations. Life for these early settlers was incredibly challenging. They faced scorching summers, brutally cold winters, and the backbreaking work of turning wild prairie into productive farmland, or dense woodland into productive farmland. Many first lived in simple sod houses or rudimentary log cabins, struggling to survive their first few years. They battled grasshopper plagues, droughts, and the profound loneliness of living in a new and isolated place. Yet, through sheer perseverance and a strong sense of community, they endured. They established towns, built schools, built churches, and created a cooperative culture that became a hallmark of rural Minnesota life. These waves of immigration created a diverse cultural mosaic, though it was a predominantly Northern European one at the time. Each group brought its own customs, traditions, and skills, contributing to the state's developing identity. While English became the common language, accents and phrases from German, Norwegian, and Swedish could be heard throughout the state. This period of settlement defined Minnesota's demographic and cultural character for the next century, instilling values of hard work, thrift, and community cooperation that continue to shape the Minnesota Nice ethos known today. The state was quite literally built by the hands of these determined immigrants. Minnesota's journey from a remote territory to a full-fledged state was remarkably swift, driven by the rapid influx of settlers and the ambitions of its political leaders. The region was officially organized as the Minnesota Territory in 1849, with its capital established in the small but growing town of St. Paul. At the time, the territory's population was just under 5,000 non-Indigenous residents, concentrated mostly around St. Paul, the military outpost at Fort Snelling, and the lumber town of Stillwater. The territorial government, led by Governor Alexander Ramsey, quickly set about promoting settlement and building the infrastructure needed for future growth. The primary goal of the territorial leaders was to achieve statehood as quickly as possible. Statehood would grant Minnesota representation in the United States Congress, giving it a voice in national affairs and greater control over its own destiny. To qualify, the territory needed to reach a population of 60,000 residents, a milestone that was rapidly approaching thanks to the ongoing waves of immigration. By the mid-1850s, the population had exploded, and political maneuvering began in earnest to draft a state constitution and formally petition Congress for admission into the Union. This process, however, was not without its conflicts and controversies. The Constitutional Convention of 1857 was a deeply contentious affair, reflecting the sharp political divisions of the era. The Democratic and the newly formed Republican parties were so at odds that they refused to meet in the same room. As a result, two separate constitutional conventions were held simultaneously, with each party drafting its own version of the document. Miraculously, the two resulting documents were nearly identical, as both sides knew that a workable constitution was essential for statehood. A compromise committee merged the two versions into a single document, which was then overwhelmingly approved by Minnesota voters later that year. After submitting its constitution to Washington, Minnesota was officially admitted to the Union as the 32nd state on May 11, 1858. The new state's motto, L'Étoile du Nord, the Star of the North, reflected its position as the northernmost state at the time and its aspirations to be a guiding light for the nation. This achievement marked the culmination of a decade of rapid growth and political organization. Minnesota had transformed from a sparsely populated frontier territory into a recognized member of the United States, poised for even greater industrial and agricultural expansion in the years to come, though a period of immense internal conflict was just on the horizon. Section 5: Industrial Giants and Urban Growth. With statehood secured and railroads crisscrossing the landscape, Minnesota's economy entered explosive industrial growth in the late 19th century. While logging remained a major force, flour milling and iron mining emerged as the new titans. Vast wheat fields of Minnesota and the Dakotas provided raw material, and the immense power of the Falls of St. Anthony provided energy. Cadwallader Washburn and Charles Pillsbury built massive flour mills along the riverbanks. Minneapolis became the flour milling capital of the world. Not ordinary mills, centers of technological innovation. Millers pioneered a process using porcelain rollers instead of traditional grindstones, efficiently processing hard spring wheat from the northern plains. The patent created a finer flour, whiter flour, a more desirable flour that dominated the market. Washburn Crosby, forerunner of General Mills, and Pillsbury, their products shipped by rail nationwide. Wealth from milling fueled Minneapolis's spectacular growth, financing grand buildings, parks, and cultural institutions. Meanwhile, a discovery in northern Minnesota launched a larger industrial empire. In the 1880s, iron ore was found in the Vermilion Range, the Mesabi Range, and the Cuyuna Range. The Mesabi was transformative, one of the richest concentrations of iron ore on Earth. Much lay so close to the surface it could be scooped in open-pit mines. This fueled America's steel industry, providing raw material for skyscrapers, bridges, automobiles, and industrial machinery. New mining towns sprang up: Hibbing, Virginia, MN, and Ely. Specialized railroads hauled heavy ore to port cities, Duluth and Two Harbors. Massive ore docks loaded reddish-brown rock onto Great Lakes freighters, shipped to steel mills in Ohio and Pennsylvania. Lumber, flour, and iron combined to make Minnesota an economic powerhouse, driving the growth of its cities and shaping its destiny as a key player in the American industrial age. As we conclude our journey through the North Star State, we hope you've discovered the incredible depth and diversity that Minnesota has to offer. We have traveled from its ancient past, shaped by the Dakota and Ojibwe peoples whose spirits are still woven into the land, to its industrious settlement by lumberjacks, farmers, and immigrants who built a new society on the prairie. We've seen how this history has forged a unique character, one of resilience, community, and a profound connection to the natural world. Minnesota is a state of beautiful contrasts, where vibrant, modern cities rise just a short drive from the serene solitude of 1,000,000 acres of pristine wilderness. It is a place that defies simple categorization. We've explored the state's magnificent natural wonders, from the rugged, dramatic coastline of the North Shore of Lake Superior to the tranquil headwaters of the Mississippi River at Itasca State Park. We ventured into the paddler's paradise of the Boundary Waters, a land of interconnected lakes and forests where the call of the loon echoes across the water. These landscapes are not just scenery, they are a year-round playground that shapes the very lifestyle of the people who live here. The changing seasons are not just endured, but embraced, offering a continuous cycle of outdoor adventure, from summer fishing on the lake to winter skiing through snowy woods. Our tour also highlighted the must-see attractions that anchor any Minnesota visit. We saw the bustling, all-in-one entertainment world of the Mall of America, the historic grandeur of the Split Rock Lighthouse standing guard over the Great Lake, and the unique industrial charm of Duluth. We hope our practical tips on the best times to visit, how to get around, and what to pack will help you plan your own adventure with confidence. Whether you are drawn by the promise of urban exploration in the dynamic Twin Cities or the lure of quiet contemplation in the great outdoors, Minnesota has an experience waiting just for you. Thank you for joining us on this 20-minute tour of Minnesota. We have only scratched the surface of what this remarkable state has to explore, but we hope we have inspired you to come and see it for yourself. Come and walk across the Mississippi, paddle a canoe on a northern lake, and discover the friendly spirit of Minnesota-nese. There is a whole world to discover in the land of 10,000 lakes. If you enjoyed this guide, please give this video a like, leave a comment to share your own Minnesota travel plans or favorite spots, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more travel guides. Happy travels!